Imagine this for a second. You're standing in front of one of those huge wall-sized maps of the world. You've got a big box of red pins. Now, you start pinning one on every single person living in North America. That's everyone in the US, Canada, Mexico, all the way down through Central America to Panama. That's a lot of pins.
That's already a massive undertaking. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of millions of people right there.
But you're not done. Not even close. Now you move south. You start tagging every single person in South America, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, the whole continent. And just for good measure, let's fly across the Pacific and do the same for all of Australia. Every person in Sydney, Melbourne, the Outback, all of them.
Okay, so now we're talking about an immense amount of humanity. The landmass alone is staggering. 3 whole continents.
It is. But here's the part that, well, it just stops you in your tracks.
Yeah.
If you take the population of India, and we have to be really specific here, we're using the 2001 census data from our NCERT source material. India's population back then was still larger.
Wow.
Larger than all of those 3 continents combined.
That really puts it in perspective, doesn't it? It's a staggering visualization. We throw around numbers like a billion so casually these days, you know? They just become words. We get numb to all the zeros. But when you frame it like that, spatially, pitting one country against 3 continents, it forces you to feel the sheer weight of what we're talking about.
And that's exactly what we're here to do. This isn't just about numbers in a table. We're going to dissect the people part of the India People and Economy NCERT textbook. This is Chapter 1, Population Distribution, Density, Growth, and Composition. It might sound a bit dry, but honestly, this is the absolute bedrock of Indian geography.
I take that even further. I'd argue it's the bedrock of the entire general study syllabus for any UPSC aspirant. You can't possibly understand India's economy, its security challenges, its environmental stress points, or its politics without mastering this demographic map first. It's the canvas, really. Everything else is painted on top of it.
Okay, so before we dive in and start unpacking all this data, let's be super clear about our mission today. This isn't just a casual chat. This is a strategic deep dive, and it's specifically tailored for UPSC aspirants. We're powered by the whole philosophy of the Simplified UPSC by PPP YouTube channel.
Precisely. The goal here is to take this static information from a textbook and make it operational. We want to show you, the listener, how to take a paragraph from Chapter 1 and turn it into a high-scoring point in a mains answer. We're here to bridge that gap between just reading the material and actually scoring with it.
So on that note, if you find this level of analysis valuable, we have a very humble request. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Simplified UPSC by PPP YouTube channel. It genuinely helps us keep creating this content. And for those of you who are able and want to support this mission more directly, please do consider supporting us on Patreon.
And a huge, huge thank you to everyone who is already supporting us. You are the ones keeping the lights on and allowing us to put in the hours to do this kind of detailed research. We truly appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And please engage with us. Like this audio, share your comments, we read them all, and definitely check out the Telegram channel. We've got free notes and practice previous year questions, the PYQs waiting for you there, and for the ultimate organized experience. Just DM us on the public channel. You can join the private Telegram library for premium notes, extra PYQs, and model mains answers.
It's a fantastic resource, especially if you want to streamline your prep. Okay, so I'm assuming we have a roadmap for how we're going to tackle this beast of a chapter.
We absolutely do. A 4-part roadmap to navigate this. First up, we're tackling distribution and density. We're going to look at not just where people are, but why they are there. We'll break down the physical versus the socioeconomic drivers.
Right. And we need to get past that basic people per square kilometer metric. The NCERT offers some much more sophisticated ways to look at density, and that's where the real insights are. Most people miss that.
Second, we're diving into growth. The story of India's population over the last 100 years is really a drama in 4 acts. It goes from stagnation right through to a population explosion. It's a real roller coaster.
That historical context is so crucial. You can't understand where we are now or where we're going if you don't see the trajectory of how we got here.
Third on the list is composition. This is where we break down the rural-urban split, the unbelievably complex linguistic tapestry, and of course, the religious demographics of the country.
And here's the secret sauce for today's deep dive. I'm going to be constantly linking these concepts from the textbook to actual UPSC Mains questions from 2013 all the way up to 2025. We're going to reverse engineer the exam to show you exactly how this chapter helps you solve very specific problems.
I love that. Practical application is everything. All right, let's not wait any longer. Let's jump into part one, the heavyweights distribution and density.
Let's do it.
So we started with that big visualization, the comparison to the Americas and Australia, just to set the scale. But let's look at the raw numbers from the source. India's population in 2001 stood at 1,028 million, just over a billion, second only to China at the time. But when I look at the dot map, figure 1.1 in the text, it's not a uniform spread at all. It honestly looks like someone spilled a bottle of ink in some spots and left other parts of the page completely blank.
That is the single most defining characteristic of Indian demography: extreme spatial unevenness. It's not a blanket thrown over the country, it's more like a patchwork quilt. And some of those patches are incredibly thick, while others are threadbare.
Okay, let's talk about the thick patches first, the heavy hitters. The text lists Uttar Pradesh with the highest population, followed by Maharashtra, Bihar, West Bengal, and Andhra Pradesh.
And if you just group the top 10 states, so you add Tamil Nadu, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Karnataka, and Gujarat to the list you just mentioned, they account for about 76% of the country's total population.
76%.
Yeah. Stop and think about that for a second. 750 million plus people are crammed into just 10 of the states. It's an incredible concentration of humanity.
That concentration is just mind-boggling. And then you look at the other end of the spectrum, the margins. Jammu and Kashmir with 0.98%, Uttaranchal, which is now Uttarakhand, at just 0.83%.
Yeah.
And then there's Arunachal Pradesh. I mean, it's a physically massive state when you look at it on a map, but it holds a minuscule 0.11% of the people.
And that really begs the fundamental question, why? Why is UP bursting at the seams while Arunachal is, for all intents and purposes, empty? It's not random. Nature and history don't roll dice like that. The NCERT is very clear that this is driven by two main categories of factors: the physical factors and the socioeconomic ones.
Let's break down the physical factors first. It feels intuitive on some level, people like flat land and water. But how should an aspirant frame this in an answer to make it sound academic and, rigorous?
You have to talk about the triad: climate, terrain, and water availability. It's the classic formula for where civilizations emerge. The North Indian plains, the river deltas, the coastal plains, they all have incredibly high population concentrations. And why? Because they offer that perfect combination: flat land for building and farming, fertile alluvial soil that gives high yields, and of course, abundant water.
It's really just the path of least resistance for survival, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you're a farmer in, say, 1850, you're going to go where the soil and the water work for you, not against you.
Exactly. And then you contrast that with, say, the interior districts of central India or the Himalayas or large cuts of the Northeast. There you've got rugged terrain, which makes building infrastructure like roads and railways incredibly expensive. It makes farming difficult. You've got harsh climates, either too cold at high altitudes or too arid in the desert regions, and water can be scarce. The basic carrying capacity of that land is just fundamentally lower.
But wait, the text brings in a nuance here that I found really fascinating. It says this pattern isn't totally static. It specifically points to Rajasthan and Jharkhand as places where this pattern is changing.
This is a fantastic point. This is where human intervention starts to override raw geography. Take Rajasthan. Historically, large parts of it are desert. Logically, it shouldn't support a high density of population, but then you have the Indira Gandhi Canal, this massive engineering project that brought water to a place where there was none. And suddenly, the carrying capacity of that land shoots up. Technology literally changes the physical constraints.
And what about Jharkhand? That's not exactly easy terrain either. It's part of the Chota-Nagpur Plateau.
No, it's not. But Jharkhand has something the fertile plains don't have in abundance: minerals. The availability of mineral and energy resources creates a completely different kind of magnet. It's rugged terrain, not great for large-scale agriculture, but the pull of industrial employment from mining and manufacturing creates these dense population clusters. So you have these industrial clusters that are essentially defying the agricultural logic of population distribution.
So resources can act as a powerful magnet, even in what might seem like hostile terrain.
Yeah.
That's a perfect segue into the second major driver, the socioeconomic and historical factors.
This is the part that students often overlook. They focus too much on the mountains and rivers. The NCERT highlights a key phrase: the early history of human settlement.
Right. I circled that phrase. It sounds almost, archaeological. Why is that relevant to modern demographics?
Because demographics have inertia. A body in motion stays in motion. The river, plains, and coastal areas aren't just densely populated because they're fertile now. They're densely populated because people settled there thousands of years ago. And once a settlement is established, it develops its own gravity. You get transport networks, you get markets, you get cultural centers. It builds on itself over centuries.
The text actually points out a kind of paradox here. It says that in many of these very densely populated regions, the natural resources, the land and the water, are actually showing signs of degradation.
Yes, precisely because they've been so heavily exploited for so long. The soil is tired, the water table is dropping. But the concentration of people remains incredibly high, so why don't they leave? Because of that history. The established settlements, the developed transport networks, they keep people there. It's often harder to leave than it is to stay, even as the environment around you degrades. And that is a critical point for understanding the environmental stress India faces today.
And then on top of that historical layer, we have the modern socioeconomic factor, urbanization.
This is the real game changer in the last century. The text explicitly links the high population concentrations in places like Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Bangalore, and Pune to industrial development and urbanization. These cities are like massive vacuum cleaners, just sucking in rural urban migrants who are looking for work and opportunity.
Okay, so that's the theory. We've got the physical factors setting the stage, history locking in the patterns, and modern urbanization tweaking the map. How do we turn this knowledge into marks? What's the secret sauce here for an aspirant?
Well, this links perfectly, almost word for word, to the 2025 General Studies Paper 1, question 17. The question was, discuss the distribution and density of population in the Ganga River Basin with special reference to land, soil, and water resources.
Wow, okay, that is literally a direct lift from this chapter. They're not even trying to hide it.
Not at all. And if you haven't read this NCERT chapter carefully, you might just write a generic answer saying, oh, lots of people live there because it's nice and flat. But to score high, you use the NCERT framework we just discussed. You explicitly structure your answer around that triad. Flat terrain, which is land, alluvial fertility, which is soil, and perennial rivers, which is water.
And I assume you should also connect it to that historical factor we just talked about.
Absolutely. That's how you get the extra half mark on every point. That's how you climb the ranks. You mentioned that this perfect combination of land, soil, and water allowed for an early history of settlement, which led to a compounding effect on density over centuries. That gives your answer real depth. It shows the examiner you understand the causal links, the why behind the what not, just the simple outcome. You're basically telling them, I know the geography, but I also know the history that created this demographic map.
That is fantastic, actionable advice.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. From distribution, which is where people are, to density, which is more about how crowded they are.
The crucial distinction. Distribution is spatial. It's about the pattern. Density is a mathematical measure of pressure on the land.
And the numbers in the text show this relentless climb. Back in 1951, just after independence, the density was 117 persons per square kilometer. By 2001, it had nearly tripled to 313.
That is a massive, massive increase in pressure in just 50 years. I mean, just picture it. For every one person standing in a field in 1951, there are 3 people standing there in 2001.
And the spatial variation in density is even more extreme than the distribution map. You mentioned Arunachal Pradesh before. Its density is 13 persons per square kilometer. 13? You could, in theory, walk for kilometers and not bump into another soul.
And then you compare that to the National Capital Territory of Delhi, 9,340 persons per square kilometer.
9,000, that's just, it's hard to even comprehend. It's a completely different human experience.
It is, and even if you look at the major states, the variation is huge. You have West Bengal at 903, Bihar at 880, Kerala at 819. These are incredibly dense societies. I mean, for perspective, that's denser than many entire countries in Europe.
But I have a problem with this data point, and I'd love to get your take on it. This people per square kilometer. The arithmetic density, it feels a bit, well, a bit dumb, for lack of a better word. I mean, if half of a state is a rocky, uninhabitable mountain or a barren desert where you can't grow a single thing, does it really matter if the overall density is low? The pressure on the actual usable land must still be huge.
You have just hit on the critical limitation of basic geography. And this is something the NCERT explicitly addresses. You're right. Arithmetic density is a crude measure. It's a blunt instrument. It treats every single square kilometer as equal, whether it's a fertile river delta or a barren piece of rock. It completely ignores the quality and utility of the land.
So how do we get a truer picture of the situation? If I want to know what the real stress on the land is, what metrics should I be looking at?
The source introduces 2 much more sophisticated metrics that, honestly, every serious aspirant needs to memorize and know how to use. They are physiological density and agricultural density.
Okay, let's break those down. What is physiological density?
This is the total population of a region divided by the net cultivated area.
I see. So you change the denominator. It's not the total land anymore. It's only the land that is actually being used to produce food.
Correct. So this metric measures the real pressure of the entire population on the food-producing resources of that region. Think about a state like Himachal Pradesh. Geographically, it's a large state, so its arithmetic density might look quite low. But most of that land is steep, rocky mountains. The farming happens in these tiny, narrow valleys. So its physiological density could be absolutely skyrocketing because you have the entire state's population depending on that tiny sliver of farmable land.
That completely changes the narrative for hill states or desert states. It reveals a hidden vulnerability that a simple map hides.
It does. It reveals the true load that the soil is carrying.
And what about the second one, agricultural density? How is that different?
This one is even more specific. It's designed to measure the crowding within the agriculture sector itself. The formula is the total agricultural population divided by the net cultivable area.
And who is included in that agricultural population?
It includes three specific groups: the cultivators, who are the landowners, the agricultural laborers, who are the landless workers, and their family members. Basically, it's everyone whose livelihood depends directly on farming that piece of land.
So in a country like India, where we have such a massive agrarian workforce, this metric is basically telling us about things like disguised unemployment, right?
Precisely. If that number is very high, it's a huge red flag. It means too many people are trying to eke out a living from too little land. It signals low productivity, poverty, and that the land is fragmented into tiny, uneconomical holdings.
This is a huge aha moment for answer writing.
It really is. I mean, if you're answering a question on Indian agriculture or rural poverty, and you just mention arithmetic density, you sound like a generalist. But if you use the term agricultural density to explain the structural problems of land fragmentation and disguised unemployment, you signal to the examiner that you understand the deep structural economic issues. You're speaking the language of a bureaucrat, of a policymaker, and an economist.
That's brilliant. Okay, so we've mapped the space. Now let's map the time. Let's move to part 2, the timeline of growth.
Yes, this is where history and geography really start to merge. We're looking at the demographic pulse of the nation over an entire century.
The source material covers 1901 to 2001. First things first, we need a solid definition. What exactly is growth of population?
Well, in simple terms, it's just the change in the number of people between 2 points in time. But for any serious analysis, we have to distinguish between natural growth and induced growth.
Right, natural is just births minus deaths.
Exactly. It's the biological component. And induced growth is all about migration, people moving in or moving out of a region. This chapter focuses mostly on the natural growth trends, although migration does play a cameo role in one of the phases.
The headline stat that jumped out at me was the doubling time. The text says at the growth rate at the time of writing, which was 2.4% annually, the population would double in just 36 years. That is terrifyingly fast.
It's the power of exponential growth. But the key nuance is that this speed hasn't been constant. And the NCERT does a great job of dividing the last century into 4 very distinct phases. This periodization is absolutely critical. For any answer on demographic history, you need to know these 4 phases and their dates.
Okay, let's walk through them. Phase I is from 1901 to 1921.
This is known as the stagnant or stationary phase of growth.
Stagnant is putting it mildly. The source notes that the decade from 1911 to 1921 actually recorded a negative growth rate. The population literally shrank.
Which is almost unimaginable to us today. We just assume that population always goes up.
So what was happening? Why did it shrink? Was the birth rate low back then?
No, quite the opposite. The birth rate was incredibly high. People were having very large families. The problem was that the death rate was equally high. The source lists the grim causes: very poor health and medical services, widespread illiteracy, and a highly inefficient food distribution system.
So it wasn't family planning that was keeping numbers down. It was famines and epidemics.
Exactly. It was a classic Malthusian check on the population. The Spanish flu of 1918, for example, played a huge role here, even though the text focuses on the general conditions. People were simply dying almost as fast as they were being born. Life was incredibly precarious.
Then we hit the year 1921, which is often called the year of the Great Divide in demography. This marks the beginning of Phase 2, from 1921 to 1951.
And this is the period of steady population growth.
What was the big shift? What changed after 1921?
We started to win the battle against death. There were gradual improvements in public health and sanitation across the country. Transport and communication networks also improved, which meant that for the first time, food could be moved from surplus areas to areas facing famine.
Okay, so the death rate starts to drop. But what about the birth rate?
That stayed high. Culture and social norms change much more slowly than technology. So for the first time in India's modern history, a significant gap opened up between the birth rate and the death rate. And that gap is growth.
And this happened even with the backdrop of the Great Depression in World War II.
Correct. The underlying demographic momentum was stronger than even those massive global crises.
Then comes the big one, Phase 3, from 1951 to 1981, the population explosion.
This is the era that really defines modern India's demographic challenge. The average annual growth rate during this period hit 2.2%.
So why the term explosion? What happened to make it so dramatic?
It was a perfect storm, really. After independence in 1947, we had a period of centralized planning and development. The economy started to improve, living conditions got better for many, and as a result, mortality rates absolutely crashed. Which is a great achievement, of course. We want mortality to crash. But fertility rates remained stubbornly high.
So fewer people dying, people living longer, but still having the same number of children, the same large families.
Exactly. Plus, the source material also mentions a significant migration factor during this phase. The influx of Tibetans, Bangladeshis, Nepalis, and of course, people from Pakistan during the partition and subsequent conflicts all added to the absolute numbers. So you had very high natural growth combined with this induced growth from migration.
This seems like a perfect moment for a PYQ linkage.
It is. This connects directly to 2015 GS Paper 1, Question 10. The question asked about the main cause of population increase in India.
Okay, I can see how a lot of students might just write a generic answer about illiteracy or poverty.
And they'd get average marks for it. But the sophisticated answer, the one that comes from understanding Phase 3, is to explain the lag. The main cause was the very rapid decline in the death rate, which was a result of development and better medical services, while the birth rate failed to adjust downwards at the same speed. It's that widening gap between the two rates that caused the explosion. It's a much more structural and analytical argument.
I see. It's all about the differential rates of change. That's a great point. And that leads us into the final phase, Phase 3, which is post-1981.
The slowing down phase. Now, this is important. The growth rate is still high in absolute terms, but the rate of that growth is declining.
So the car's still moving forward very fast, but we've started to take our foot off the accelerator.
That's a perfect analogy. The crude birth rate finally started to come down significantly during this period. And the source credits this to a few key factors. A notable increase in the mean age of marriage, an improved quality of life, and crucially, a big push in female education.
We'll definitely come back to that point about female education later, because it seems to be the key lever for everything. But even within this slowing down phase, the text is careful to emphasize that there's huge regional variation.
Oh, massive variation. It's like two different countries. You have the Kerala model with a growth rate in this period of just 9.4%, which is very low, comparable to developed nations. And then at the same time, you have the high growth states in the north, like UP and Bihar, which were still pushing growth rates of 20 to 25%. So India was effectively operating on two different demographic timelines simultaneously.
Before we leave the topic of growth, there's a really important statistic about the youth population. The source says that 22% of India's population in 2001 was made up of adolescents, aged 10 to 19.
This is the famous youth bulge.
Mm-hmm.
The text calls this group a high potential resource, but it also includes a very stark warning. If this potential is not properly channelized, it can become a significant challenge.
And that just screams demographic dividend, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And that links directly to 2016 GS Paper 1, Question 16. The question was about the demographic dividend remaining only theoretical unless our manpower becomes more educated, skilled, and healthy.
The NCERT basically predicted that exact question. It goes on to list the challenges that adolescents face: a lower age of marriage, high rates of illiteracy, especially among female school dropouts, and nutritional deficiencies.
Exactly. So when you're answering a question on the demographic dividend, you don't just use the buzzword. You quote the data from the NCERT. 22% of the population is in the adolescent age group. Then you pivot to the specific challenges the text lists: nutrition, education, skilling, to show why the dividend might remain theoretical if we don't act. You're using the textbook itself to build and validate your argument.
It's incredible how these textbooks, when you read them closely, are basically policy briefs in disguise.
They really are, if you know how to read them critically. They aren't just a collection of facts. They're diagnosing the nation's health.
Okay, let's move on to the third part of our roadmap. Composition. We know how many people there are and how they grew. Now let's look at who they are.
This is the qualitative aspect of the population. This is where we add the color and texture to the numbers.
Let's start with the most fundamental split, the rural-urban composition. The headline stat is clear. 72% of India, according to the 2001 census, lives in villages.
And the text gives a number that always just blows my mind. India has 638,588 villages. Just think about that for a second. It visualizes the sheer scale of the governance challenge. Imagine trying to deliver clean water, electricity, schools, and healthcare to over 600,000 separate, distinct settlements.
And again, like everything else, it's uneven. Himachal, Bihar, and Sikkim have very high rural populations, whereas Goa and Maharashtra are over half urban.
And the text notes that urban growth has been accelerating, especially since 1931, driven by economic development and migration.
This connects so directly to the topic of smart cities, which seems to appear constantly in the UPSC exams.
Yes, like in 2016 and again in 2025. In fact, 2025 question 8 specifically asks how smart cities can address the problem of urban poverty.
So what's the link from this chapter?
Well, the NCERT source explicitly tells us that urban regions like Delhi and Mumbai have high population concentrations because industrial development draws in rural-urban migrants. Therefore, a huge component of urban poverty is a direct function of this migration. The slums are filled with people who have come from villages in search of jobs.
So a smart city strategy can't just be about putting up fancy sensors and free Wi-Fi.
Exactly. That would be a superficial answer. A deeper answer, rooted in the NCERT, would argue that any smart city strategy must address the fundamental challenge of integrating this migrant workforce. If you use the NCERT logic that migration drives urbanization, you can argue that smart cities must focus on things like affordable migrant housing, social security, and skilling programs to truly solve urban poverty. You're linking the modern technological concept of a smart city to the demographic reality on the ground.
Okay, let's move from where people live to what they speak. The linguistic composition. This feels like a potential minefield.
It is incredibly complex. The source cites Grierson's famous linguistic survey from the early 1900s. He identified 179 distinct languages and 544 dialects in India.
That's basically the Tower of Babel. It's amazing the country functions at all. But the text does a good job of grouping them into 4 major language families. I feel like this is a great factoid for a prelims question, or to add depth to a cultural answer in mains.
It is. Let's run through them quickly for our listeners. First, you have the Austric family, also known as Nishada. Think of the languages spoken in Meghalaya, the Nicobar Islands, and the Munda languages of central India. These are some of the most ancient roots. Then you have the Dravidian family, or Dravida, which is dominant in the South Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam.
Then there's the Sino-Tibetan family, or Kirata, which you find all along the Himalayan fringe, from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh.
And finally, the largest group, the Indo-Aryan or Arya family. This covers most of north, west, and central India and accounts for about 73% of the total population.
Now, here's where this gets really interesting for mains. I'm looking at 2020 GS Paper 1, Question 10. It asks, do you agree that regionalism in India appears to be a consequence of rising cultural assertiveness?
That is a very tough analytical question. It requires a nuanced take on identity politics.
It does. But look at what the NCERT says about linguistic boundaries. There's a golden sentence in here. It says that linguistic regions do not maintain a sharp and distinct boundary. Rather, they gradually merge and overlap.
That is a fantastic sentence. I would highlight that in my personal notes. You can use that exact quote to build a very sophisticated argument. You can argue that while language is certainly a basis for regional identity, the natural geography of language in India is fluid and integrated. The rigidity and the sharp boundaries often come from political assertion, not from the way people have historically lived. The fact that the languages overlap and merge suggests a natural integration. People living at the borders have always spoken both languages.
That's a deep point. The text itself provides the nuance you need to counter a simplistic black and white narrative. Okay, let's move to the next layer of identity. Religion, the religious composition.
And again, the key here is the spatial distribution. It's not just a pie chart of percentages, it's a map. Where do different communities live?
Hindus are at 80.5%, the major group at almost every part of the country. But the text is careful to note the exceptions. along the borders, like the Indo-Bangla and Indo-Pak borders, in Jammu and Kashmir, and in the hill states of the Northeast.
Then you have Muslims, who are the largest minority at 13.5%. They are concentrated in specific regions, Jammu and Kashmir, parts of West Bengal and Kerala and western UP, and they form the majority in the Kashmir Valley and in the Union Territory of Lakshadweep.
Christians are next at 2.3%, and again, spatially concentrated, mostly along the western coast, Goa and Kerala, and in the hill states of the Northeast, like Meghalaya, Mizoram, and Nagaland.
So why does this geographical detail matter for the UPSC exam? We'll look at 2015 question 15 and 2019 question 10. They asked about the concept of secularism and the challenges to cultural practices in the name of secularism.
Go on. How does the map help?
When you discuss a concept like secularism in the Indian context, you have to understand that it operates on this very specific map, where different religious communities are concentrated in different pockets. The challenges to secularism, the communal tensions, often arise in these border zones or in areas of high diversity where different groups live in close proximity. Conversely, some of these same areas have developed beautiful syncretic cultures. The point is, the spatial distribution of religion helps explain where and why certain communal or secular debates arise. Geography underpins the polity.
That's a great connection. Okay, finally, let's look at the composition of the workforce. This is the economic engine of the country.
The census divides the working population into four main categories. You have cultivators, agricultural laborers, household industrial workers, and then a big catch-all category called other workers.
And when you dig into this, there's a massive gender aspect, isn't there?
A huge one. The text makes a very important observation. The participation of female workers is relatively high in the primary sector.
Which basically means agriculture and allied activities.
Yes. So while there is some improvement in women's participation in the secondary and tertiary sectors, manufacturing and services, they are still disproportionately doing the hard labor in the fields.
And this connects perfectly to 2019 question 9, which was, empowering women is the key to control population growth.
Let's connect all the dots right here. This is the synthesis. We saw earlier, in Phase 4 of population growth, that female education was a key driver in lowering the birth rate. We see here in the workforce composition section that a large number of women are still stuck in the low-productivity primary sector.
So the argument you would build for that mains question is?
The argument is this. To effectively control population growth, which is the topic of 2019 Q9, you need to empower women. And how do you do that? You shift them from the primary sector, as per the workforce data, into the secondary and tertiary sectors, primarily through education and skilling. This increases the age of marriage, it increases their agency and control over their own lives, and that, in turn, naturally lowers fertility rates. You're building a complete logical chain of argument using different data points from the very same chapter.
Boom! That is a complete data-backed argument using only Chapter 1. Incredible.
That is the whole power of doing a deep dive like this. You're not just memorizing isolated facts, you're building an arsenal of interconnected arguments.
This brings us perfectly to Part 4. Synthesis. We've covered a lot of ground. Distribution, density, growth, composition.
But the real key, the takeaway for any aspirant, is to see them all as one single interconnected system.
You can't separate density from the terrain. That's the geography part of it.
And you can't separate the story of growth from policy and history. That's the history and economy part.
We've managed to link this single chapter to questions on smart cities and how population density drives the problem of urban poverty. We've linked it to water stress and how the concentration of population in the river plains puts immense pressure on water resources.
And we've linked it to gender, the declining child sex ratio, which is mentioned in the text, and the critical role of women in the workforce. It really just goes to show that this one chapter is a foundational document for the entire GS Paper 1 syllabus.
Before we wrap this up, I just want to do a quick recap of the key takeaways for anyone who's been taking notes.
Let's do a quick blitz through them.
Okay, takeaway number 1. India's population is massive and extremely unevenly distributed. This pattern is driven by a combination of physical factors like water and terrain and deep historical factors. Number 2, density is a tricky concept. To really understand it, you have to look beyond simple arithmetic density and use the more nuanced metrics of physiological and agricultural density. 3, the story of India's population growth happened in 4 distinct phases: stagnant, then steady growth, then the population explosion, and finally the current phase of slowing down. And 4, The composition of this population is a complex mix of rural dominance, incredible linguistic diversity, and distinct religious pockets.
And the most important point is that every single one of those takeaways has a direct, demonstrable linkage to a previous year's question in the mains exam.
Now, for our final provocative thought. The text we've been analyzing makes a projection about the future.
It does. The NCERT source cites a projection by the World Development Report. It predicted that India's population would touch 1,350 million, or 1.35 billion, by the year 2025.
Well, here we are, sitting in 2026.
And we have, of course, surpassed that projection. But here's the thought I want to leave everyone with. We talked about that 2016 question on the demographic dividend. And we talked about that statistic from the 2001 census, that 22% of the population was in the adolescent age group.
Right. Those adolescents from 2001, they are now in their prime working years. They are the workforce of today.
Exactly. And so the provocative question is this. Did we actually utilize that potential? Looking at the data we have today on other workers versus agricultural laborers, did we successfully transition that massive youth bulge from the farms into the factories and the service sector? Or did the sheer pressure of density and the strain on our resources end up overwhelming the dividend before it could be fully realized?
That is the single most important question that defines India's current economic reality. The data in this chapter from 2001 was the warning sign. The reality we live in today is the result.
It's a sobering thought. It reminds us that the numbers on a page in a textbook have very real, very tangible consequences for hundreds of millions of people decades later.
And that is where we will leave you to think. This has been a deep dive into NCERT Class 12, India, People and Economy, Chapter 1.
And a presentation by Simplified UPSC by PPP.
Please, if this deep dive helped you connect the dots in a new way, take a moment and hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps us keep the lights on and this content coming to you.
And if you are in a position to do so, please consider supporting us on Patreon. And another huge shout out to all our current supporters. You guys are the absolute best.
Don't forget to like this audio, leave a comment with your thoughts, and head over to the Telegram channel for all those free notes and practice PYQs.
And for the premium, organized library of all our content, just DM us on the public Telegram channel to join.
Until the next time, keep learning and keep analyzing.
We'll see you in the next deep dive.